This next chapter is going to focus on the actual pages in your notebook here in OneNote 2007. It's kind of a setup chapter to the next chapter, which is all about printing. And if you do plan on printing any of your content, you'll need to consider things such as the margins, the paper size. You'll maybe think about colors and backgrounds as well, depending on the scenario. So in this chapter, we're going to get you set up for printing, and we're going to start in this lesson with the actual paper size. You may recall from previous lessons that here in OneNote on the screen, there's no limit. You can stretch out to the right and go all the way down and continue to add content forever. It's not like a word processor where you run out of space and then you're on to the next page. So because of that, we need to consider these things before we go to print. I've got a notebook open here called Corporate 1. If you've got the exercise files, you'll find this one in the Lesson 10 folder if you'd like to follow along. But really, any notebook will do at this point, because as long as we've got content and we know we can continue on forever with that content, setting up our paper size is going to be very important if we plan on printing any of this. And here I've got an example where I've got staff meetings, revenue meetings, quarterly meetings, information that I may need to print and share with others attending certain meetings. So maybe the staff meeting notes I take this time, I'll be printing out and taking with me to the next meeting as a refresher. So in this case, I'm going to be on the staff meetings section. The very first page is called Staff Meeting 924, and I'm ready to print this out, let's say. Before I do, I want to make sure that the paper size is in line with the paper I have in my printer. To do that, we go up to File, and then down to Page Setup. Now this is going to open up our task pane on the right-hand side with the Page Setup pane showing up. And it's broken down into sections: paper size, margins, we'll talk about that in the next lesson. We've also got page colors and titles, for example. But right now, let's focus in this section here where we've got 4 options: size, orientation, and then width and height. Now, one thing you'll notice is that we have no ability at this point to change the orientation, the width, or the height. That's because the size is set to auto. That's the default I was talking about, which means we can continue on forever with this page in front of us. We can go out to the right and down, way past a standard paper size. So if we do plan on printing, this is important that we go to the size drop down first and select one of these sizes. Now, if you're not familiar with Statement, you can click on it to see that that's a 5.5 inch wide by 8.5 inch tall piece of paper. If I go up to Statement and go down to Letter, very popular here in North America, you can see that's 8.5 wide by 11 high. That's only because the orientation is set to Portrait. Now, it's not going to change anything I see here on screen. I'm not going to see the end of the page, for example, until I scroll all the way down, and the right-hand side of the page until I scroll all the way out to the right here. But if I scroll down to the bottom of the page, and I click down here and start typing, I'm going to type in the word content, and hit return a couple of times, you can see it actually goes past the edge of the paper, meaning if I did have additional content down here, it would show up on the next page. So I wouldn't see that with the auto settings selected. I'm just going to right click on the border here and delete that. Scrolling back up and over to the right now to our page setup pane here, let's change the orientation to landscape. All that's going to do is flip-flop the width and the height settings. So now it's a wider piece of paper, 11 inches wide by 8.5 tall. That's because letter is still selected. So now when I scroll down, I've actually got less room down here at the bottom and more room off to the right. And you can see some of that is showing up here. That's where the bottom likely is and the right edge of my paper. So some of this is going to get cut off, it would appear. The only way to know for sure is to go up to our print preview. If we go up to the File menu now and down to Print Preview, we're going to see what this looks like on paper. And sure enough, some of the information is getting cut off down here in our preview. Current page is split into 2 printed pages, and I've got navigation buttons down here to move me to the previous or next page. And you can see on the next page the rest of my note. Nothing's getting cut off at the right-hand side, so everything's fine that way. Notice the print range and the paper size is set to letter here, something I set up from my page setup pane a moment ago, and landscape. But I can change it back from here. Let's go back to portrait. You can see that does all fit on one page, so I can close that up And now I want to make sure that this is set to portrait because that's going to work out nicely for me. So 8.5 by 11. There are some other options here under the size. We've got some popular ones like A4, for example. We see that a lot in the European countries. If you're doing postcards or index cards, you've got that option down here as well. And right at the bottom is custom, where you can choose any width and height in this case. And if you've got special paper, for example, and it doesn't show up on that list, well, you can just backspace or delete the contents here. Let's say it's a 5-inch wide piece of paper by 12. I could click down here, take out that and add it to. And now I've got my custom paper size. But I do want to come back here to letter. That's exactly what I have in my printer right now. Portrait, 8.5 by 11. I'm done with my page setup. So I can close this up. Go up to File and Print Preview to confirm this is going to work out nicely for me, which it is. So if I was ready to print, I could right from this screen. I'm going to click Close though, because we have a whole chapter dedicated to printing coming up after this chapter. So that's setting up your paper size. Once you've got that set up, you might also want to consider changing your margins, and that's what we're going to do in the next lesson.